Do you ever find yourself struggling with emotions? Depression, anxiety, stress. Well, today we're going to share some clinical advice on how to better understand your emotions. Because if you don't understand your emotions, you definitely aren't going to be able to change them. Hi, I'm Brett R. Williams, licensed psychotherapist. And today, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding emotions. And I could start off with the question of, what do you think emotions are? Do you understand? Do you understand what your emotions are and how they work? I would have to say no. The reason I would say no is because most doctors, MDs, psychiatrists who specialize in understanding the brain don't understand the emotions. Not the way we're going to talk about them today. Clinical psychiatrists, clinical psychologists often don't understand emotions, particularly the way we're going to talk about them today. So this is going to be a really important topic. And I think it's really important topic because emotions are really the crux of our life. They're the one thing in our life that we struggle the most with. We either struggle with our emotions to get rid of maybe negative emotions. Maybe we're overwhelmed with depression or anxiety. But other times we struggle with our emotions because we can't get them to come on, like creating motivation and drive. So to be able to deal with this, probably the biggest problem in our lives, which is our inability to understand and be able to control and regulate our own emotions, I want to help you think a little differently about emotions. Now, I love the brain, and I always go back to how the brain works so you can understand what we're talking about. And this piece of the brain that I've just grabbed here is the culprit. This is the problem, maybe. This little piece of our brain sits in the center of your brain. It really sits in the middle of your brain. It's here in the core of your brain. If I reconnected this is where it would sit. And this is called your limbic system. And the limbic system is where we know your emotions are being generated. And I always like to point out how differently this part of your brain looks from the rest of the brain, because it is a different brain. This is your emotional mind. Again, if I ask what are emotions, the answers I typically hear and get from people are words like emotions or feelings, anger, sorrow, joy, love, happiness. Well, those are labels, true. Those are labels that we've created to maybe help us identify what our feelings are. But those are not the feelings themselves. They're words to describe our feelings. So what are our feelings? What are emotions themselves? Well, some people would say emotions are reactions, responses to our environment, our circumstances, and that's definitely true. You could take that one more step and say that emotions are even responses to the way we think. The way our thinking brain projects information down to the limbic system will generate emotions as well. But again, those things are telling us what stimulates emotions, but they don't tell us what emotions are. So I want to spend a minute thinking about what emotions are. Here's the really easy answer. The easy answer is that emotions are electrical signals. That's all they are. Emotions are electrical signals, particularly electrical signals generated by our limbic system. We have a lot of electrical signals in our brain. We don't classify them all as emotions. Sometimes I have a thought and I think something, and that isn't classified as an emotion. We'll classify it as something else. And part of the reason why we classify that as a different thing is because it's not generated from this part of the brain. So emotions, in the most simple way of understanding, is they're just electrical responses generated by the limbic system. And these electrical responses travel through our core brain, the base brain, and then down through the spinal cord and out to the body. What emotions do, as you can think about that, emotions, they're drivers. Emotions drive actions. They stimulate from the brain, they fire through the nervous system, out into the peripheral nervous system, out into the body, and they stimulate behaviors, actions. Emotions are our drivers. So what they drive in terms of behaviors may be a little bit different. Like anger may drive a certain behavior, where sadness may drive a different behavior, or love may drive a different behavior as well. But that's what emotions do. They stimulate action, activity. What kind of activity depends on the emotion. Now, let me give you some examples that you are more familiar with of electrical signals, because once we understand emotions as just neurosignals from the limbic system, then we can understand how to begin to change them, which is ultimately what I want to teach you. So I want you to think about what makes color. So I'm going to use for an example 2 glasses. One glass has red food coloring in it. The other one has blue food coloring in it. What makes red? What makes blue? Again, red and blue are words. They're not the words that represent the color, but they're not the color. What makes the color red, or what makes the color blue? Well, I hope from our basic educations, we understand that what makes those 2 different colors, is that they have different frequencies. The red frequency, the light waves that are coming from that red glass are a different frequency than the blue ones. And in fact, to be more concise about that, the red waves are longer frequency waves, meaning that electrical wave is made up of a signal. And the signal has a crest and a peak and a valley, basically. And it's just a wave, just like a wave on the ocean. And that wave is understood or taken in by our eyes and then translated. So these long waves that make up red, we see and we label as red, where the light waves that are coming out of the blue glass are shorter waves. They're not as long as the red. They're much shorter waves. And so our brain recognizes them. They're different electrical signals as a different color. Well, that's right there. That's what's happening in your brain with emotions. Your emotions are electrical signals, and not all the signals are the same, right? It couldn't be the same, because then you wouldn't be able to tell one emotion from another emotion. So each emotion we have has its own electrical signature. And the signature is basically the frequency of the wave. Long waves and short waves basically is how it works. Now, what we know from EEGs, electroencephalographs, those kind of skull caps where we watch brain activity, is that your brain is producing all kinds of different waves. And what we see is that when your brain is producing really high frequency waves, which means the really short, tight ones like we see in the blue, those are what are called beta waves. And when somebody's experiencing a lot of beta waves being generated throughout their brain, what we normally see in terms of what they're reporting and what's going on for them is a lot of agitation, a lot of upset. So typically negative emotions have high frequency waves. They're in the high beta wave category. And so what we see is the waves begin to expand. They get longer and longer wavelengths. We start seeing the alpha, the delta, the theta waves. And as we see these longer waves, people start to report different experiences. Their feelings change. They're feeling calmer. They're feeling more relaxed. They're feeling maybe peaceful. So we can see by just watching the electrical stimulation in the brain, emotions are waves. Emotions are electrical signals. And those waves, those electrical signals, can be thrown into two different categories. We typically call them good feelings and bad feelings, negative or positive feelings. And some people don't like those terms because they want to see emotions as emotions. But, the bottom line is we feel certain feelings, and some feelings feel pleasant, and some feelings don't feel so pleasant. And so, in some general sense, there's a good experience, a positive experience with emotions, and then there's a negative experience with emotions as well. Well, what we typically find is that the negative emotions, anger, fear, stress, pain, all of those negative emotions are high frequency emotions. They're up in remember? Do you remember what it's called? They're in the beta waves. Those high frequency emotions are typically what we see when we're feeling bad. And then the longer low frequency waves, what we see down in the theta waves, is the calm and peace and relaxed. Basically, the difference between good feelings and bad feelings is the difference between the frequencies. Now, I know I cannot feel a wave frequency. Well, I can't consciously feel it, but my body's feeling it, obviously, because I'm feeling some emotion. And so here's how I typically feel different frequencies. One feels tight. This is what I call collapse. And the other one feels flow, which feels good, which feels positive. One feels expansive and open, and the other one feels collapsed and tight. That's, again, the difference between our positive feelings and our negative feelings. All negative feelings are high-frequency waves. They produce a collapse in your body, a tension, a stress. That is going to be felt as a negative, where all positive emotions have more flow to them. And the more flow, the more positive it feels. Love, joy, happiness. These all have a flowing feeling to them. And what's giving that a flowing feeling is the lower frequency, the long waves. And what's giving this a feeling of collapse is the tight waves. Is that making sense? Now, I ask you the question, why is all that important? Well, what if we could change the waves? What if we could change the frequency of the signals that are coming out of the limbic system? Well, if you could do that, you could change your emotions, because that's all your emotions are. So again, let's go back to color for a minute. If I have two glasses, and in this example, I'm going to have two yellow glasses. If I have two glasses filled with yellow, then what would happen if I added different colors or different frequencies to them? Well, what will happen is that yellow color will change. So if I add a little bit of blue to the yellow, it turns to green. And if I add a little bit of red to the yellow, now it turns as kind of an orange. So introducing new frequencies into the old frequencies changes them. And that's what we want to start doing in changing your emotions. We want to start introducing new frequencies in your brain, new energy patterns. And those new energy patterns are going to begin to interrupt and ultimately change what you're feeling. And it's not like a hope and a gosh, that'd be sure nice if this could work. It's gonna work. It has to work, because that's physics. As I change the frequency of the wave, I change the emotion. And that's going to be really, really key. Now, you may be asking, because I know I am, how do I do that? And that's what we're going to talk, I hope, a lot about in a lot of these videos, is how do we change the frequencies of our waves? But there's one more variable I want to talk about that also needs to change, and that is the amplitude of the wave. That's the second quality of any signal. Light signals, sound signals, all kinds of waves in our lives, they have frequency and they have amplitude. It's the difference between AM radio and FM radio. AM radio stands for amplitude modulation, which means when they send out the signal, what they're doing is they're manipulating the wave based on the amplitude. FM is a manipulation of the frequency of the wave. They manipulate the frequency of the wave and then send that out, and then that gives you your signal in terms of what you're listening to on the radio. Well, the same thing happens inside your body with your emotions. Your emotions are affected clearly by frequency, which is the length of the wave again, but it's also affected by amplitude. And let me show you a little bit about what that looks like. So in this next simple example, what I do is I have 2 glasses. And what I do is I add food coloring to each one of the glasses. But what you'll notice is that the food coloring distributes differently between the 2 glasses. And the reason for that is one glass is filled with cold water and the other glass is filled with hot water. The glass with cold water distributes more slowly, and sometimes it doesn't distribute at all, where the glass with hot water distributes more quickly and more completely throughout the system. Well, that's the way, again, it works with your limbic system. If I have a thought, for example, generated by my thinking brain, and the thought is, that was good. But that thought doesn't have a lot of amplitude to it, or it doesn't generate a lot of amplitude in my limbic system, again, which is the intensity. It's almost like cold water. Yeah, that was good. But what if I had a thought that had a lot of energy to it? Oh, that was bad. Oh, that sucked. You can even hear in the sound waves of my voice how the amplitude has gone way up. What if I even said the same phrase like, that was good. That was good. Again, we can hear the amplitude goes way up. As the amplitude jacks way up, the energy becomes more intense. It becomes more distributed throughout the system. And that's what happens with you. When you have emotions that are just kind of blah, there's not a lot of energy to them. Those emotions don't distribute very well. And that's particularly a problem when we're thinking of positive things. But if I could drop the amplitude when I'm thinking about negative things, that actually could be really, really helpful. If I think, yeah, that sucked, or yeah, that was bad, but have a really low amplitude to that thought, then it's going to generate a very low amplitude emotional response from my limbic system, which is then going to be projected in a very low amplitude signal throughout my body. So those are the 2 things that we're always going to be working on manipulating and changing inside of your emotions to help you learn to get control of your emotions. Because those are the 2 things that make your emotions: the frequency and the amplitude of the electrical signals generated by your limbic system. Now, I always want to leave you with homework assignment, and you may think this homework assignment is kind of lame because you want something much more dramatic. Don't we all? But the homework assignment I want to leave you with is actually quite transformative. I want you to be aware of the energy that's being transmitted by your brain. You're feeling feelings all the time. Maybe some of the feelings you're feeling have low amplitude and they're kind of weak, but they're there. You're always feeling something. And I want you to begin to pay attention to the electrical signals in your body. You're mainly going to feel them as collapse and flow. That's how you're going to feel them. But I want you to start to become conscious. Start to become aware of these electrical signals, because that is the beginning point. If you can't be aware of these electrical signals, I will absolutely guarantee you we cannot change those electrical signals. So the first part of change is making yourself aware. And that's what I want you to do for a homework assignment this week, is I want you to be aware of the electrical signals in your body. Just see if you can pay attention to them. And then later on, we'll start learning. We'll start learning ways to control or alter. I like the word manipulate. We can change those signals so you can change your emotions. Hey, I am Brett R. Williams, licensed psychotherapist. And again, thanks so much for checking out this post. If you want to know more, if you want to learn more about what we're going to talk about with emotions or how else I'm going to provide some clinical advice about your emotions or clinical advice about your life, your depression, your anxiety, your relationships, you need to subscribe. And I'd love to see you like the videos as well as make some comments, because that way you and I can interact a little bit better. All right, again, I look forward to seeing you soon.